The temple incident? That's a very good question. Now, to understand the temple incident a little better, the one that Jesus does where he kicks over some tables, etc., we got to understand size because size does matter. And being a carpenter, I like architecture. I like to sketch a few things. So we're just going to grab myself a piece of paper here and a felt. And I'm going to do a little sketch for you. So you got to understand Herod's temple. That's the one that Jesus had his little incident in. So originally, the temple was built by Solomon after King David had given him all the material for it. And it was a fair-sized temple, but it wasn't that big. And then it was destroyed by the Babylonians and they went into captivity there. And then they'd come back and rebuilt the temple with its holies of holies in here, which was always very disappointing whenever foreigners went into the, because there was nothing in there. Unlike other temples, the Holy of Holies was just a room, which at one point in time housed the Ark of the Tabernacle, but now it was just an empty room in the middle of the temple. And outside the temple, out here, you have this big altar for offering of the sacrifices where the animals were burnt after that. So King Herod, realizing that the Jews were very disappointed in the size of the temple and wanted them to do with a favor, he had enlarged the temple. So this is not drawn to scale at all, and it wasn't quite just a rectangle, but it was interesting. So built on the Temple Mount. So to actually elevate it up above Jerusalem, that was a very significant part. So Herod actually went to a lot of work to expand the mountain out here. And then once he had expanded it, he expanded to about 35 acres of land. So it's a fairly large piece of land. And you'd have the columns on the side here. And this is where the government or the administration, the Sanhedrin, would meet in these porcelains on the side here. But he'd also, so he had restricted because the Jews didn't want impure people coming to the temple. So he restricted this strictly to Jews. So if you'd entered in here and you weren't a Jew, you'd be executed immediately, which was odd because the Romans always liked to keep that power with themselves. But they had given that to the Sanhedrin for they could, the temple system. So they had posted little signs here that if you cross it, blood be on your own head. It's your own fault that you died, which is intriguing. My one daughter asked me, well, how would you know if they were Jews or not? And I was like, well, the simple tell is pull down their pants. Awkward. But I guess if there was a big incident, that was heard. But then the majority of the land around the temple was the court of the Gentiles. And in this area, anybody could come, even the people who would be considered impure. They were not necessarily practicing Jews, but people who are interested in the worship of Yahweh or simply thought it was an amazing building, which it was. Josephus describes it as you're coming over the mountain, you see it. It was like a mountain that was rising up with the snow peak. It was just how the marbles, it was actually phenomenal. So I could see people just coming to see the temple just for the architecture because it was a really beautifully well-built place. Herod the Great was actually an amazing architect. But more to our point, so Jesus kicking over the benches was where the doves, I wonder if I could actually draw a little dove. Nope, not an artist, definitely a carpenter instead. The doves were sold here, and this is where he kicked over. So this is not where the actual sacrifices were being offered, and it was over a removed area to the court of the Gentiles. So two things we should take from this. One, Jesus did not affect the actual sacrificial system. Seemed like he still had some respect for that. As E.P. Sander points out, Jesus could have easily bought an animal, walked it in here, and actually stopped this whole temple sacrifice system if that's what he really had a problem with. It would have been easy enough for him to do. But he didn't. He stayed out in the court of the Gentiles and did his teaching over here. He kicked over some benches, stopped some money changers, yelled at a few people, but he didn't do much more than that. Two is, like I said, it's a 35 acres. And Bart Ehrman points out that it's very intriguing that such a large area that one man, we'll just call this one man here, don't make graven images, but there's our one man here with a little whip, that he couldn't actually have stopped the sale of animals in the entire area. Like the booths over here, they would continue to operate. The worshippers would still have come in here and bought from there and went in and did their sacrifices. Even here, if Jesus had created an incident here, 35 acres is a lot of land. He could be yelling and screaming here, and people would just continue to walk around here if they so pleased to do. So Jesus' actions were more symbolic than actually trying to stop the temple's sacrifice. Something to consider. Size does matter. Content matters when understanding what's happening.